Welcome to your last week of Unit 6. We're going to look at the Allies' victory both in Europe, and then we'll just go over the dates real quick in the Pacific since we kind of covered all of those battles on the islands last week. So in the book, they're going to talk a little bit more about the Pacific and the island victories, Guadalcanal all the way to Leyte Gulf, to Okinawa, and we already talked about those. So I will give you the dates, but I'm not going to go over them again. Now, real quick, this is a really awesome fact. During World War II, George H.W. Bush, the dad that was president for one term, was actually a Navy pilot. A group of pilots were shot down, captured, tortured. He managed to escape and found his way back to his ship, which is really crazy. And there's actually footage, I don't know how, it seems pretty coincidental, of him being rescued and brought on to the aircraft carrier. So if you ever want to look that up, it is a pretty cool fact about one of our former presidents. So let's look. So after Pearl Harbor, the United States, and we referenced this briefly when we were talking about the Pacific, already had a plan in place for when they joined the war, and that plan was Plan Dog, which meant they were going to focus on Europe and kind of ignore the Pacific, put all their resources into winning the war in Europe, and after that was over, they would turn back to the Pacific and Japan. So, knowing that they were going to focus all of their attention on Europe, the Axis powers, they kind of had, the Allied powers had to look and go, okay, what do we do first? So Churchill, FDR, and Stalin, well, Stalin wasn't there, but he was involved in the conversation, excuse me. So Churchill and FDR meet at the White House. And they're like, all right, we're doing this. What are we going to do first? What's our plan? And that is a great question. So they looked at what the Axis powers were doing. So they had captured the Axis powers in Europe, had captured all of Europe, right? Minus Spain that they were leaving alone, Sweden they were leaving alone, and Great Britain, right? They had pushed in Operation Barbarossa was already going. They had pushed all the way into Moscow. They were pushing into the Middle East, which we don't talk about very much. They left Turkey alone, but they were definitely moving into British territory in the Middle East looking for oil. And they were pushing into Africa. Now, pushing into Africa was mainly led by Italy, right? But we had Libya. They were pushing into Egypt to try and get to the Suez Canal. So they were kind of expanding, right, from the continent. So remember, we had left the Pacific behind, right? So we're not going to talk about the Bataan Death March today. But remember, the Philippines were captured, all of those men. No one came after them, right? So we're going to have a couple years where that area is left alone to let Japan kind of do its thing, right? So you do not need to write these down. I'm going to ask you some hypothetical kind of what would you do? So we know we're going to move into Europe first, but where do we start? Let's see if you can see all of this. Almost. Okay. So option number one, you can go to Britain and launch an invasion from Britain across the English Channel into France at Normandy. That's option one. Option two, Stalin is asking for help. If you saw the Stalingrad video, you know that Stalingrad was under siege. Moscow will be kind of under siege. They'll be attacked. Leningrad will be under siege, and they need support. So Stalin asks for help. Strategy number three would be to come into North Africa from a naval attack from Great Britain, come down through the Mediterranean, attack in through Egypt and Libya, that area, El Alamein, and then work our way north through Italy in that direction. So what do you think we should do? What do you think we do? What we end up doing is strategy number three. That is going to be Operation Torch. That is the British plan. Now, guess how Stalin feels about that, about us choosing not to go with his plan and to help him when he desperately needs it. Not so good. This is going to be the start of the Cold War. So in November of 1942, the Allied powers will begin a sea and land invasion, mainly by sea. You can see the red coming in there, and invasion of Morocco and Algeria. So we're not over yet, right? We got to get into the Mediterranean first. This will be led by Dwight D. Eisenhower, future president of the United States. He's also the guy that will lead the D-Day invasion. This is kind of his test, his first really big leadership role. We will quickly take North Africa and then we'll move north into southern Italy. See the Sicily right there? So we're going to move up through there. The only problem is once we've hit that point, Germany realizes what we're doing and start to send troops down through Italy. The weather's going to turn sour, and we're going to get bogged down right in the middle of Italy. So we're kind of going to get stuck there in a stalemate. So we've got North Africa, we've got southern Italy, but we're going to get stuck there and have to kind of figure out a new way if we want to continue to move into. So while that's all happening, remember we left Stalin and the Soviet Union alone. So at that same time, we're going to talk about Stalingrad. So with Operation Barbarossa, Hitler had advanced into the Soviet Union looking at three cities, Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. Now, Leningrad he'll have under siege. Moscow he's not going to be able to get, but he is going to attack Stalingrad in the summer of 1942. Now, if we've learned anything, we have learned that you never attack Soviet Unions, or you never invade the Soviet Union, or you never invade Russia in winter. So it's summer. We should be fine, right? No problem. So when Hitler and the Germans invade Stalingrad, or they try to invade Stalingrad, what they end up doing is we end up having a 6-month siege where they actually get into Stalingrad. They don't like surround it like an old school siege and like try and like starve them out, even though they do kind of do that as well. But they end up making it into the city, but it ends up being this like building by building battle where the Germans are going to have to go into one building and try and take one building at a time, and they're not able to. It is a epic fail for the Germans. And 6 months puts them into winter, and they are not adequately prepared for winter. So the Germans will end up calling this battle Rattenkrieg, which is like a rat war, because they are literally chasing rats from building to building. And it is an urban war. It's in the city. You can see the remains of buildings there. They are getting hit from the Luftwaffe, right? They're getting bombed from the aircraft. We have the Panzer divisions, which are the tank divisions, but it is never, there's never going to be a sure victory, right? This is going to be going from one building to the next. There's the Soviets and their winter. Now, by the time winter hits, right, the Soviets are prepared. They've got some backup that's come in. They actually have some Siberian, like Russian military come down that are used to that weather to give them some support. And the Nazis are not prepared, and Hitler will not reinforce them. He will not send them winter wear. He will not help them out. Many of them will starve, and they will end up surrendering to the Soviets. I believe 90,000 will surrender. Nearly all of them will die in Soviet POW camps. Remember, think all the way back to the gulags and that kind of thing, right? And this, kind of like the picture from Iwo Jima, is an epic picture of the Soviets. And here are your facts right here we need to know. So Hitler refused to let them retreat. Winter comes. All right, so back to where we were. Sorry, phone call interruption. All right, so Stalingrad is over. The Germans surrender. And luckily for Stalin, well, 2 points here. First off, remember Stalin was really mad that we didn't offer to take his plan and support him, but now he did it on his own. He won without our support. He beat Hitler without any help. That is going to be really big moving forward for the Soviet Union's ego and kind of what's going to go. Decision 2. We've taken North Africa. We've moved into Italy. We're kind of stuck. What should we do? Again, this is one you don't have to take any notes on. Just throw it out there. What do you think? 1, we know we're stuck in Italy. Do we send more troops? There's not that many Germans there to push forward. 2, should we jump over into France, into that Vichy France? It's technically a free France, kind of, and then move up through France. Or 3, again, do we go back to Great Britain? This was from our last time, cross the English Channel into northern France at Normandy, or do we send more troops to help the Soviets? What do you think? Now this one, if you know anything about history, we should see where this is going. This is going to be strategy 3. That's going to be the invasion across the English Channel, better known as D-Day, led by that guy right there, Dwight D. Eisenhower. So you're going to talk a lot about D-Day in U.S. history, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview. It was actually known as Operation Overlord. There are several rumors and theories about where D-Day came from, but we just call it D-Day. Happened on June 6, 1944. Originally supposed to happen a couple days earlier, but weather didn't permit that to happen. So this would be the planned invasion of France, led by General Eisenhower. Remember him from Operation Torch. Now, it had the element of surprise for two reasons. One, Hitler knew that we were going to attack. He just didn't know where we were going to attack along the beach there. But he assumed, and if you look at this map, that we were going to attack at Calais. It's a silent S there, because it is the shortest point. So obviously that would be the easiest place to cross. So he is kind of going to set up most of his troops at Calais, waiting for the invasion. So what did we do? Now, how did he protect himself? So the way that Hitler protected that border, if we look at this green line on that map there, that is known as the Atlantic Wall. And that was a fortified wall that Hitler built all along the border of his territory against Great Britain, knowing that an attack would come at some point. Now, if you look, it goes all the way up into northern Norway, into like Arctic territory. That was just kind of random, like fortresses, little things set up. But when we are across from Great Britain, it looks more like this one down on the bottom here, where we have layers of defenses. You have the concrete bunkers on top with machine guns. You have smaller pillboxes with machine guns as well. You have barbed wire, minefields. You have these ramps and these bombs set up and these mines and these Belgian gates in the water. So what that means is you really have to strategize when you're going into this, right? Because you don't want to come in at high tide. Because if you look where that dotted line is at high tide, you would come in and you would hit all of those things and you'd be done. But if you come in with low tide, you're only going to have to walk through those things, right? But you're also going to have machine guns firing at you. So which is worse, right? We're going to aim for low tide, so at least we can avoid those people. High tide, you're going to blow up, so it's not going to be any good anyways. So, beeping. Here's some pictures. This is modern day, right? Parts of the Atlantic Wall are still around today. So, planning for the D-Day invasion takes over a year. The reason is it is an invasion on such a large scale that we don't have the boat. First off, they have to be flat bottom boats, because remember Dunkirk, when we couldn't get to any of them because the area was so shallow that no big boats could get across. So no big boats can get across in an invasion. So we're going to create these Higgins boats, which are a flat bottom boat. They can go right up to the shore, drop the bottom without hitting any of the stuff on the bottom, any of those minefields or Belgian gates, and be safe. We need trucks, we need ammunition, we need trained soldiers. So we take all this time to plan. At the same time, remember, we're building up all of this over in Great Britain, right? We're prepping in Great Britain. So we are still trying to deceive Hitler to think that we are going to cross at Calais, right? So we also need the perfect weather. Now, we talked about this. We need a low tide so we don't run into that stuff, but we also need a full moon because we are going to cross in the early morning while it's still dark and we have to be able to see. We also know that we are going to bring in paratroopers the night before to kind of clear the way and land kind of behind to try and open up some bridges and that kind of thing. And so they're going to need a full moon so they can see, and they're going to need clear skies in order to get across there, right? Now, the reason this ends up happening a couple of days late is that the weather had been terrible. So it was almost scrapped altogether. June 6th, it finally opens up. It's kind of our last chance, and we're able to push it through. So, oh, here we go. So talking about ways we were trying to fake out Hitler into thinking that we are going to cross at Calais. General Patton, that's him right there, right? We've seen him a bunch. He was in charge of the tank divisions. Remember that in World War I? But he's kind of a rebel, kind of gets in trouble sometimes. And he is actually in really big trouble for yelling at and kind of beating up one of his soldiers that was suffering from PTSD. He almost got kicked out of the military, and they decided to give him a second chance because they decided they can't kind of win without him. Like, he is that good. He's just kind of got this messed up mentality about certain things, and he's kind of a fireball, right? You kind of don't know what's happening. And so they put him in charge of Operation Fortitude. And Operation Fortitude is a fake army. So see that right there? That is a blown up tank. So they create an entire army at Kent, right across from Calais, to trick Hitler into thinking that that's where they're going to cross. And so he is in charge of all these fake soldiers and all this fake equipment. And that's kind of his way. He has to prove himself, and he will come back in the Battle of the Bulge in charge of an actual division. But here is his kind of punishment for what he did earlier, as being in charge of this fake division. but it does a really good job of tricking Hitler into thinking that they're to cross at Calais. We also get a layout of the beaches. If you've seen anything about D-Day, you know that we are going to land at 5 beaches. Americans are going to land at 2. British are going to land at 2. And one of the ways that we figure that out is by French intelligence, right? From the French resistance. And one of the ways they transmit information is from pigeons. And I just think that's the coolest thing ever. So we have more people, we have more guns, we have more tanks, we have more ships. We are going to have more, more, more. And we are just going to pound Normandy until we advance. And that is what we do. So here's what it's going to look like. You can see the 5 beaches right there. So Utah and Omaha are going to be the U.S. beaches. Our airborne division is going to come right behind Utah. They're going to be a little off base. We're also going to have a landing that's misplaced. We have 2 British divisions and a Canadian division. Remember, Canada's connected to Great Britain still at this point, right? Former colony, part of the Commonwealth. And so they will play a huge role here as well. And there's the British Airborne Division going in, hoping to land near Cayenne. So here we come up onto the beaches. This is Omaha, one of the American beaches that we will land upon. There are all the pieces. If you've ever seen Private Ryan, this is the opening scene of Private Ryan landing here. This is the way we'll advance. They will try their best, but we're going to have to make it past all this stuff first to get up. And there is what the Higgins boat looks like. Now imagine this. You know that there are machine guns firing down upon you, right? And they're going to drop this, and there's going to be just a wall of soldiers. First thing that happens, machine guns are going to take that out. So people are going to start jumping over the sides, trying to do all these kind of things to avoid that experience. So here we are landing at the beaches. There's the paratroopers coming in before. Just look at how many people there are coming onto the beaches at that time. And while it is not easy, we will push past D-Day. We will take Normandy. We will move into France. Now, follow from Normandy there. The Allied powers are going to push through France. We're going to reclaim France. We're going to get Paris. We're going to push through Belgium, and we're going to begin to push into Germany. Now, at that same time, remember, the Soviets have just won at Leningrad. They're going to start to push through Poland into Germany as well. So Hitler kind of knows he's coming to the end. Like, what is he going to do? Is he going to give up? So he makes one decision. He's got to look around. He goes, what am I going to do? I'm running out of soldiers. I'm running out of stuff. They've surrounded us, so we're not getting supplies into our people. The Germans are starting to revolt against me. So he decides that he is going to do one move that was successful earlier in the war and was kind of not really successful in World War I. He is going to do a push through the Ardennes forest right there at the Belgium-France border. Now, one of the reasons he's going to do that is it's not as heavily fortified, right? Because it's a forest. Remember that. And you would think, most people would think that tanks would not do very well there. But earlier in the war, when they'd gone through the Ardennes the first time to get into France, they'd been fine. So they decide they're going to try and make it through. Now, the problem with this decision, and I don't know if it's a problem, depends on which side you're on, is he decides to launch this attack in December of 1944. So the reason it is called the Battle of the Bulge, you can kind of see it right there, is we've got this straight line. So imagine this was a straight line, right? And then Hitler is going to push through one point, kind of where that blue arrow is pointing, right? And he is going to create a bulge, right? An indent into the line of defenses of the Allies, right? Now, he never breaks through that bulge. That's why it's called the Battle of the Bulge, because he pushes, he almost breaks through, but in the end, he fails. And that is Hitler's last shot. That is his last chance. He is unsuccessful, and after several weeks, they will back off, and that will be the end. At the same time, let's jump down into Italy. At the same time that this happened, Mussolini had kind of lost all power. The religious leaders are going to come back into control, the king, and they are going to arrest Mussolini, and they will end up hanging him. This is here at a gas station, actually. His body will hang there for days so that people can go by and spit on it, hit it, whatever they want to do. So that's what they did down in Italy as the war comes to a close and the end of Mussolini. Then April is going to be a pretty crazy month. So in April, right, we have Mussolini dies, FDR dies, right? So his vice president, Harry Truman, will take over. And then Hitler is also going to die, supposedly, in April. So it's a pretty crazy month for leadership changes, right, in the world. So in April, American troops will cross into Berlin, Soviet troops cross into Berlin. Now remember, Soviets were on their own, so this kind of becomes a race, right, of who can get to Berlin first, and the Soviets will win. So the Soviets get into Berlin, and on April 30th, Adolf Hitler and his longtime girlfriend, who he had married just shortly before, will both commit suicide in their bunker, and on May 7th, Germany will surrender. And that brings to, there's that picture, I know I showed it before, but that's the picture of the Soviets putting up the flag in Berlin to show they got there first. I had that under the wrong thing earlier. And on May 8th, the Allies celebrated. Now remember, in Europe, they just call it Victory Day. In the US, they call it VE Day, Victory in Europe, because we still had to go to the Pacific. Now let's jump over to the Pacific. I know that we have already talked about it in detail, so I'm just going to do a brief rundown of what happens. So if we start at Pearl Harbor, in the middle right there, you can follow, there's kind of ones that are random here. Now the first one is actually going to be the Battle of the Coral Sea down there in the bottom by Australia. Excuse me. That will lead almost directly into the Battle of Midway. And from the Battle of Midway is when we're going to kind of begin that island hopping campaign with Guadalcanal, into Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and we'll kind of hop over and around as we go with Saipan, reclaiming different pieces. Guam we'll get back as well before we get to Okinawa. So let's look real quick. It's up to you if you already have these dates down or if you just want to take a picture. Let's make sure this all shows up. There we go. Perfect. So I didn't put the Battle of the Coral Sea, even though that's the first time the US and Japan will actually ever see each other like in a naval battle. That one's kind of a draw. Midway, we know, is going to be the first battle fought solely from aircraft carriers, since Midway is not a true island. It's just like a runway on an atoll. And then we're going to move to the Battle of Guadalcanal, which will be the first, like, this is going to be the first time the Japanese will be in retreat and will lose something, because Midway was controlled by us, was controlled by the United States, but they were trying to capture it. Guadalcanal, we're actually going to take it. Leyte Gulf is going to be when we reclaim the Philippines with Douglas MacArthur coming back in several years after fleeing from it to Australia. Iwo Jima is going to be the battle with the epic flag raising. Okinawa. Now, Iwo Jima is going to be important because that puts us in range of planes, so we start bombing attacks on Tokyo. But we're not able to launch an invasion from Iwo Jima. So we start bombing between March and April, we start bombing Tokyo nonstop. So we are bombing Tokyo the entire time that we are having these other battles. Next, we'll move on to Okinawa, which is going to be the bloodiest of all the battles because it is the last island right before Japan. So the Japanese refuse to give up. We've got Banzai charges, which is that to the death, right? Kamikaze pilots. And when we capture Okinawa, that is kind of the last because now we can plan our land invasion. We have the plan in place to invade the Japanese mainland, or right, but at that same time, FDR has become, he has passed away. Truman has become president. The bomb is successfully tested, and so Truman makes the call to drop the first bomb on Hiroshima in August. And he drops the first bomb. No word of Japanese surrender. Now, we had spoken about surrender before, and Japan was actually pretty willing to surrender given some things. But one of the things they had to do was admit that their emperor was not a deity, was not a religious, like a god. And then they had to do several other things that they were not willing to do. So we dropped the first bomb. 3 days, we heard nothing. We dropped the second bomb. And within several days, now, Japan will surrender before this, but the actual signing of the unconditional surrender will happen on the USS Missouri on September 2nd. And that will officially end the war for